The rain had started sometime before dawn. Not the loud kind that drums against the roof and demands attention, but the steady, patient kind that seems to wash the world clean while everyone is still asleep. Daniel Harper noticed it when he stepped out of his old pickup truck that morning. He paused for just a moment, letting the cool air touch his face, breathing in that faint scent of wet pavement that so many of us remember from younger days. Daniel was 38, tall, dark hair brushed neatly to one side, a quiet strength in his shoulders, the kind of man who didn't say much, but when he did, people listened. He adjusted the strap of his worn leather messenger bag and looked up at the glass tower in front of him. Inside that building, executives were panicking. $100 million was at risk, and Daniel Harper, a single father of a 12-year-old daughter named Lily, had only been called in because someone had run out of options. He wasn't a flashy consultant. He didn't wear expensive watches. His navy button-down shirt was pressed, but simple. On his sleeve was a small company patch from his modest engineering firm, the kind of detail most people would overlook. He liked it that way. Inside, the mood was different from the calm outside. Phones were ringing, voices were raised. The air felt tight. At the end of the long conference room stood Evelyn Grant, the CEO, mid-50s, blonde hair cut neatly to her shoulders, sharp gray suit, the kind of presence that commanded attention without her raising her voice. But this morning, her composure was cracking. When Daniel entered, she turned toward him. Her expression carried both authority and exhaustion. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had already rehearsed what she needed to say. "We're losing the contract," she said quietly. "If we can't fix this system failure by noon, the deal collapses." She didn't mention the amount again. She didn't need to. Daniel nodded slowly. No grand speech, no promises, just a calm nod. "Show me," he said. "Now, if you've lived long enough, you know something important. When everyone else is shouting, the calm person becomes the anchor." They led him to the control dashboard, screens full of data, charts, error messages scrolling faster than anyone could interpret. Engineers had been up all night. Coffee cups lined the table, ties loosened, tempers frayed. Daniel placed his bag down carefully. He rolled up his sleeves, not dramatically, just matter-of-fact. He studied the screen. He didn't rush. He didn't blame. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply observed. And sometimes, that's where wisdom begins. Minutes passed. The room shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn folded her arms, watching him closely. There was something in her expression, a flicker of doubt, or perhaps fear. Daniel asked a few quiet questions. When was the last firmware update? Who authorized the override? Has anyone checked the secondary backup loop? The questions weren't complicated, they were patient. The kind of questions that come from experience, not ego. You see, Daniel hadn't always worked in corporate buildings. For years, he had fixed agricultural systems out in the Midwest, long drives, dirt roads, equipment that didn't care about titles or degrees. Machines only respond to understanding. And people, well, they're not so different. He leaned closer to the screen, then he saw it. A tiny configuration mismatch, almost invisible. One line of code that had been copied from an outdated template. He exhaled softly. There are moments in life when the solution is not heroic, it's humble. He tapped a few keys, confirmed a setting, restarted the system sequence manually instead of through the automated script. The room fell silent. One by one, the red warning lights disappeared. The scrolling error messages slowed, then stopped. A green status bar filled the screen. System stabilized. The clock on the wall read 10:17 a.m., less than 15 minutes. Someone whispered, "That's it?" Daniel stepped back. "That's it." For a long moment, no one moved. And then, something unexpected happened. Evelyn Grant froze, not from shock at the technical fix, but from recognition. She looked at Daniel more carefully now, not at his shirt, not at the patch on his sleeve, but at him. "You fixed it," she said softly. Daniel shrugged slightly. It just needed to be seen. Those words, they hung in the air. It just needed to be seen. You know, in our 50s and 60s, many of us have learned something similar. Sometimes a problem isn't complicated, it's overlooked. Sometimes a person isn't incapable, they're unseen. Evelyn dismissed the room gently. Engineers left, murmuring in disbelief. Soon it was just the two of them in the quiet conference room. The rain outside had slowed. Sunlight filtered faintly through the glass. Evelyn removed her glasses and set them down. Her voice changed, softer now. "Do you know what that contract is worth?" she asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "I heard a number. 100 million, he nodded. Then he surprised her. "I'm glad you won't lose your team over it." She blinked. "My team?" "If that system had failed today," he said calmly, "someone would have been blamed. Probably more than one someone. He wasn't wrong. She knew it." Evelyn walked to the window and looked out over the city. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. Daniel chuckled lightly. "My daughter says that a lot." He told her about Lily, how she loved old record players, how every Sunday morning they made pancakes together, how he'd promised to be home by 6 that evening because she had a school recital. Evelyn listened, and something inside her shifted. For years, she had measured success in quarterly reports and stock prices, numbers, growth charts, strategic acquisitions. But in that quiet moment, she was reminded of something she hadn't thought about in a long time. Her own father. He had been a mechanic, hands permanently stained with oil, never wealthy, never powerful, but steady kind. The man who stayed up late fixing her bicycle before a race, even after a 12-hour shift. She felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. "You solved in minutes what my entire department couldn't," she said carefully. "How?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "They were trying to protect themselves," he replied gently. "I was just trying to help." There was no accusation in his tone, only truth. And truth, when delivered softly, can be a gift. Evelyn extended her hand. "Daniel Harper, would you consider coming on board full-time?" He looked at her hand, then at the rain-streaked window, then back at her. "Would it let me still make it home by 6?" he asked with a half-smile. She surprised herself by laughing, a real laugh, the kind she hadn't let out in years. "Yes," she said, "it would." He shook her hand. "But the story doesn't really end there, because the real moment, the one that mattered, wasn't the handshake. It was what happened later that afternoon." Evelyn called her senior team together, not to celebrate profit, but to apologize. She acknowledged the culture of fear that had grown quietly under her leadership. She admitted that pressure had replaced perspective, and she changed it. Not overnight, but intentionally. She implemented a simple rule Daniel had mentioned in passing: before blaming, observe. Before reacting, ask. Before protecting your position, protect your people. Years later, employees would say that was the day the company truly transformed. And Daniel? He was home at 5:42 p.m. Lily was practicing her violin when he walked in. The house smelled faintly of maple syrup from that morning's breakfast. "How'd it go?" she asked. He set his bag down and knelt beside her. "It just needed to be seen," he said softly. She smiled, not fully understanding, but sensing the peace in his voice. He listened to her play, and as the notes floated through the small living room, he realized something. The $100 million problem had never been the biggest thing he solved that day. The biggest thing was reminding a room full of powerful people that calm beats chaos, that kindness outlasts fear, and that sometimes the most valuable person in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. The rain had stopped completely by evening, and somewhere high above the city, sunlight reflected off glass windows that no longer felt so cold, because one quiet man, who carried his lunch in a brown paper bag, had shown them something priceless. Not brilliance, not dominance, but steadiness. And for those of us who have lived long enough to understand, steadiness is everything.